It's a caricature of society in a sense. A thriller with a comic backbeat, sort of. Has an edginess that's edginess of paranoia that's kind of thwarted by this humorous wrench in the works played by this female detective who comes in to this huge corporation.
And it's sort of like an underworld of paranoia and conspiracy, and where everything kind of goes haywire and everyone inside gets sort of sucked into this vortex, and the only one who really ends up surviving is the investigator, this woman Angel Powers.
The character of the investigator, played by Lydia Lunch, is a different kind of investigator from the sort that you've normally seen in psycho thrillers. How did her character evolve, and how much of that character is brought by the actor?
Well, in a sense, our original idea was to take this really paranoid, sort of secretive organization that's totally corrupt in a certain way. They've taken technology and are using it to manipulate people to try to control their environment and control the people around them. And Lydia we saw as a character that can kind of thwart this, as a wrench in the whole works in a sense. And she comes in as a contrast to the hyperactivity and the hyper insanity of this whole corporation. She comes in like, I don't give a damn. You know, she comes in, it comes off like almost as a totally aloof sort of thing that just walks into the situation and throws the whole thing out of whack.
Accompanied by her musical theme with the Peter Gunn reference.
Well, it's based on the same sort of note structure as Peter Gunn, yeah.
What we tried to do with the music was almost use the music as motifs for each character, so that every time a character was introduced, they had their own theme, and we used the music then to reinforce that aspect of their character.
How did you work on the music? I understand that you both contributed to the soundtrack as well.
Yeah, we've always worked on the music basically after we have filmed the whole thing. We collaborate with musicians on it, and with this film specifically we used motifs. That was the idea for the music, and it was sort of influenced somewhat, I guess, by a track of from Mancini, Touch of Evil, had some influence, and
Well, we used Touch of Evil,
yeah.
The Touch of Evil soundtrack, and some of Lydia's earlier work on Queen of Siam as our scratch track. So when we were cutting the film, actually, we used that music sort of as a base to give it a kind of like a musical flow, so that we could get an idea of how the kinds of sounds we wanted to use. But the tracks, the music itself is a combination of a lot of people's input. Del Bertay, Richard Edson, Lydia did some work, Christian Hoffman, Jeffrey Lone, and ourselves. And some of it's more composed sorts of music that we went into a 24-track studio, actually, to record. And a lot of it's just pieces that are built up from individual instruments, recorded wild, and then we'd sync them up and play, essentially compose the music on the flatbed.
And the soundtrack is available?
On Neutral Records, yeah.
Now, the two of you have produced, written, directed, edited, designed the art direction of the film, and are distributing the film yourselves.
Hopefully not for too much longer.
and it's driving us insane. Yeah,
It's that is complete independence in filmmaking, which of course is very rare.
Mm-hmm.
To get to this point, you started with Super 8 features. Could you talk a little bit about your work in Super 8 and how that you then made the transition into 16 with Vortex?
Well, the way that our attitude towards film when we first started, we never had any film education formally. We just came in with the attitude that we were the subject, really, and the idea was the most important thing. and we really developed for each film its own style, and tried to get the subject across as clearly as possible, according to whatever style we ended up using that could emphasize and most strongly relate that idea. And we started out really in rock and roll clubs showing Super 8 films.
Our first film, actually, we started out using like a Kodak M4 camera with, you just point it and press the trigger and boom, that's it. And what we did is we're trying originally to kind of collage like a really potent imagery and potent soundtracks, and to make some, our first film was G-Man, which was like a combination of narrative and documentary and experimental sorts of techniques. So there's like a weird conglomeration of all these different styles. And each film as we've been working has been kind of like becoming more and more like we're essentially trying to get commercial, trying to get a broader audience and pick up more, getting our technique down to the point where we can, communicate more effectively.
Like the approach with The Offenders was done as a film serial, and I mean it reflects why we started out in Super 8 was because economically we just could not afford to work in 16 or 35, so we started out in Super 8, and the idea of making a serial came about because we really didn't have enough money to make a feature, and we wanted to make a feature. So we figured to show each part in a club each week, and we did about 8 weeks in a club, and we're able to finance the next part with whatever money we made at the club that week. And then we finally then cut the whole thing together as a feature. That was like the first feature that we did do. And we sort of tried to progress and broaden the audience that with each film. And I think Vortex, going into 16 millimeter, and really working on a soundtrack that works with the image and putting that out separately is sort of reinforcing that idea.
I think, for example, The Offenders, which I believe was shown in serial format at, was it Max's?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Max's Kansas City. The environment of showing a film in the context of a rock club, kind of added a dimension. I don't know how that affects your subsequent films.
Well, part of our involvement in rock and roll clubs is basically because, first off, the kinds of films that we were doing, just at the point when we started doing them, there weren't any other places that we could show it, and there was a built-in audience, people who we knew were interested in new ideas, particularly in the club scene in New York in the late 70s. It's changed since then, but it was like a cabaret sort of an atmosphere, more people sitting at tables and drinking and smoking, and they'd yell back at the screen. So it was like a really vibrant sort of atmosphere where people came to the clubs to see new ideas. And there were different groups that were more conceptually oriented. They would come, totally new kinds of music that were coming out at that point. And so it was a very good atmosphere. We for instance, like on The Offenders, while we were showing it, we were able to book the whole night, so we'd bring in solo acts and weird performance acts and all of that sort of thing. And it was a different kind of an atmosphere than what people are actually used to now in terms of clubs.
Well, the thing is, the club scene has really changed. Things have changed since the 70s, like 1978, 79, just in that things have become more commercialized. It's easier to label things, through the journalists, and things become more commercial to audiences. You have to make the item saleable, and I think that's what's happened to a lot of the clubs. They're trying to reach a broader audience, and it becomes more commercialized.
But also, it has to do with the fact that all of our films have really been we've had always put a very strong influence on the music itself. And rock and roll clubs, of course, you got the best sound systems that you can possibly get. And in terms of theaters, you just haven't got that kind of capacity. And Super 8 has the one, even as lacking as it is in visual quality, the sound quality on it is excellent. So we are able to get sound quality in these clubs that you wouldn't get, you just don't see, except you know, a large theater with Dolby sound, you know, Ziegfeld or something like that.
Since we couldn't book the Ziegfeld, we settled for some clubs.
But you know, speaking of labels, that whole kind of atmosphere, it was only what, 6 years ago. This kind of like new wave punk, whatever label one wishes to apply to it. Kind of a correlative to that was a school, perhaps, of New York independent filmmakers, including yourselves, Amos Poe, Jim Jarmusch.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about that experiences in terms of it would seem to be your roots really in that style of filmmaking, which was championed by Film Comment and say Soho News particularly.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our work more stems out of music scene and just a group of people who were interested in ideas and wanted to get across the ideas strongly. That's what was important, and it didn't really matter which medium it was done in. To do it quickly, to get it out to the audience, and get on to the next thing. I felt that film was a culmination of all the different mediums that we were interested in, and that's why we really chose film after we had gone through several other mediums. It incorporated them all. And then we were also able to have then the audience right there reacting. And that was really incredible for us at that time, just to get an immediate response and then move on to the next thing.
Well, in terms of the whole film community, I think there are, like you mentioned, a couple people, and there are hopefully going to be many, many more coming out very soon. But it's, you know, at this point it's very hard because this group of filmmakers, us included, haven't really established a kind of commercial base where we can count on an audience, you know, and that's hopefully what we'll be able to start setting up, something more similar to, for instance, the way the new German cinema has been able to operate, so that we can get an audience that will say, yeah, here's a new kind of film that's coming out of the United States right now, and it's kind of an alternative to the Hollywood structure at this point.
And that also seems to be already found an audience in Europe. I understand your films.
Our films have shown extensively in Europe. What's interesting in Europe, though, is that there's a great openness to new ideas and new films. Like, people do not really care what it's done in, whether it's Super 8 or whether it's 16 or whether it's video. It's the material that they're interested in, and they're very openly found pretty much through Europe, an openness, aside from England, where there really isn't that much of a market for film because economically it's not that feasible. There's
very expensive there.
Very expensive, and the television really takes the place of cinema. But Europe has been a good market for it.
In Vortex, you started shooting the film, and then you ran out of money.
Mm-hmm.
And then were forced to seek investors. What was that like?
Hell.
Well, we shot about 3 weeks of the film, and then we realized that our funds had been completely depleted, and so we really just started cutting together what we had and realized that, you know, that the investors was the next route to take. And it was good for us, though. We learned an incredible amount just by sort of being forced into that situation where we had to seek other sources for funding.
In a sense, we were taking a gamble because we started out with $20,000 in order to shoot the entire film, and we were able to put together a crew of, you know, some people who were like really qualified technicians and such, and we figured that since we were able to put together a crew who wanted to work with us and who we felt confident with, we really went whole hog on it and just figured to spend all of our money right in the production and then worry about, you know, once we had a rough cut of it, worry about getting the finishing money and getting the whole thing put together. So,
but that was sort of our crazy attitude about it.
Probably wouldn't do that again.
Yeah.
In fact, I would not do it again.
Well, it came out of the sort of attitude that we have and especially at that time we were doing, Super 8 features, which, I think our largest budget was $4,000, and we really had no idea at that time what it meant to actually start working with a crew, like a 16, 20 person crew, and it was completely different. With Super 8, we were our own crew. We did everything. We, shot it, lit it, did the sound, wrote it, everything, and it was just ourselves and the actors. And we had a lot of control in that way over the money and over, the overall production, had more foresight into what we were getting ourselves into. With 16, we were suddenly in this position where we were, almost like we were in the vortex in a sense, and there was no more money at the bottom of the pit, so we just kind of had to surface and find it elsewhere.
How did James Russo come to be cast?
Oh, it's a weird story, actually.
Strange.
We were looking for the Demmer, of someone who could play the Demmer character for quite some time beforehand, and then we saw a Xerox, a really crummy Xerox of a photograph of him in this stack of, we had been advertising and backstage and doing the whole, looking through photographs at different places, and we saw this grainy Xerox, and we said, "Who is this?"
No, he said immediately that this is.
This is obviously him, right? And so, but then we couldn't get a hold of the person who had given us the Xerox, so to find out who he was and how we could get his phone number. And then we heard of him from someone else immediately.
When we were casting our previous film, The Trapdoor, a friend of ours kept saying, "I know the person who could play this role. I know the person," and they kept saying, "This person, James Russo."
Actually, John Nahern, who we cast in the lead of that role, and he was saying he's an artist and not primarily an actor, and so he was saying, "Well, get this Russo. He's really good." So then we saw this film that he was in, Candy Store, where he played a retarded kid. That was phenomenal.
That won an Oscar.
Won a Student Academy Award, but he was absolutely phenomenal.
And what was great about sort of his character as opposed to Lydia Lunch's character, Angel Powers, is they're both so completely different. They're such contrasts. James Russo himself and the Tony Demmer character, they're so intense and hyper. And, the Lydia Lunch, Angel Powers character is very aloof and undaunted by anything and everything. And she has such an attitude, like I could give a shit. And the combination of the two was, we felt would be really good. We actually almost lost Lydia just before the shoot. She got really sick. Every time we're about to do something important, she gets sick. So it's like we went on this.
She ended up in the hospital. 3 days before the shooting, she goes into the hospital in L.A. And
we're looking for another Angel
Where's Angel
Powers?
Powers? And we didn't have any idea who. So we moved all of the shooting dates with Angel Powers to the end of the shooting, and shot as much as we could up to the beginning. And finally, thank God, she got out of the hospital in time to fly in to make it. But we were in a state of total limbo without.
Now, the film was shot entirely in Manhattan.
Totally in Manhattan, and most of it shot in our loft, actually.
We built the sets, and mostly in our place. A lot of the sets were done, and we got a lot of help from many different people. Like Nick Smith gave us his studio soundstage for a day, and Science Faction gave us their studio to do the laser. There were several laser shots that we used. They helped us out. There were a lot of people around.
How about the climactic scene on the roof? Where was that from?
That's in Charlie Ahern's building.
It's 42nd it's 43rd and 8th.
8th Avenue, yeah.
And that was 12 stories up, and it was
frightening.
Frightening.
Very frightening.
Very windy that night, and it was scary.
And Russo's a madman, so you never quite knew what was going to happen, right? So it was like I was tied down and holding on to him most of the time.
How do you find shooting in the city? Your other films as well?
Oh, yeah.
The city is great. I mean, I wish they were a little looser about when you shoot on the streets, in terms of permits and things like that. But it's the
hasn't been bad.
The atmosphere is really good, and I mean, New York is the the center of lowlife, and we love lowlife. So I mean,
Well, this film was a little different in a sense in that we wanted the whole film to take place at night in interiors and to be practically timeless and placeless, except for the final scene where the whole thing sort of opens up and you can see the city and it gets outdoors and you have finally and during the final confrontation the film sort of like, oh, into this empty space, right? But the rest of the film takes place in these dark interiors, with this kind of surveillance camera point of view, with it's like this locked in sort of underground almost feeling to it. So in that sense, New York wasn't really so crucial to this film as it was in some of our other ones.
Well, thanks to both of you for being on the show, and best of luck with Vortex.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, well, that was